Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us and welcome to Science Talk. I'm your host, Dr. Mohammed Ittifaq, and I am a research scientist at Harvard School of Public Health. My original job is I'm an assistant professor of communication studies, focused more on climate, health, and science and how we communicate on social media and how mainstream media talk about climate, health, and science. But today, we have a very special guest who you may have seen on YouTube, LinkedIn, or other social media platform where he talk about all things climate change and how we fight climate change. And he has interviewed many renowned scientists, authors, and communicators about climate change specifically. But before I introduce to my guest today, I would ask you to subscribe to Science Talk if you have not done it yet, so you do not miss our content on science, climate, and health. So let's go to our guest, Dan Miller. He's a host of Climate Chat YouTube channel. And it's also not only YouTube, but also Blue Sky and LinkedIn as well. He has been talking about climate change and how to fight climate change more specifically for several years now. And he has done plenty of interviews. You may have seen his guests with renowned journalists, scientists, and communicators to talk about climate action, air pollution, and climate denial, etc. So, welcome, Dan Miller.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you. So, and did I miss anything from the introduction, or if you want
Well,
to
the one
get
thing that might be useful for people to know is that I'm doing the Climate Chat YouTube channel sort of as part of my climate outreach efforts, but I actually do a lot of other things in climate. I'm a clean tech or climate tech venture capital investor. I volunteer for a whole bunch of different organizations that are trying to help with climate in various forms or another as well. So the YouTube channel is just sort of one aspect of the kinds of things I work on climate.
awesome. So, how do you reconcile, like, how do you navigate that identity? Like, oh, I'm like also venture capitalist, and also like, on the other hand, I talk about climate change.
Well, actually, I was in venture capital and not doing climate specific things when I learned more and more about what was happening with the climate back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And then, sort of in the 2000s, we switched our investment company over from just sort of regular internet and software kinds of investments into climate focused investments. And that was a long time ago. And I kept learning more and more and realizing what an urgent problem this was. And I also realized that the public and business and the media and policymakers are not well informed about what's going on. So I'm looking for every avenue I could. And this is a program that started on Clubhouse originally during the pandemic. And then we branched out to YouTube, and it's really grown a lot since then.
Awesome. Yeah, I remember I was doing my PhD during COVID and I joined Clubhouse. That was a new thing for me and I found like climate chat because I was looking for some information and content to engage with people online to talk about climate change. And that's how I actually found you on climate chat. And I was looking at you had done a lot of episodes there. And it's
Yeah.
there, still there. I mean, if people want
Yeah.
to check it out, right?
That's right. But our big focus now is on YouTube. It's
On
easier
YouTube,
to
yeah.
access the programs. They're also visual. The Clubhouse was audio only, so now you can also see the interviews on YouTube. And we get the top climate scientists in the world. We had Jim Hansen on a couple of weeks ago. He's like maybe the most renowned climate scientist, and we've had so many others as well. Just had Bill McKibben last week, who is one of the top climate journalists around.
Awesome. Yeah. So, for our viewers, if you want to check more about Dan's chat with scientists and journalists on environment, climate, and health, please check out Climate Chat. I will put that link below in the chat
Great.
as well. So you can check out those. And I always love those because the good thing about your YouTube, I think I realized that you do live on certain days. So
Right.
you can like kind of schedule ahead of time, like, oh, Sunday around this time, he's gonna be live with this person. So you can actually click on notify. It's like it will notify you like whenever you guys
Right.
start the chat. So that's a great thing, I think. So how's your experience so far with YouTube and talking about climate?
Well, it's been great for me. I learned so much by talking to these climate scientists and again authors, advocates, solution providers, and everyone. So it's a great educational experience for me, and I hope for all the listeners. I will say, though, that compared to like cat videos or
Yes.
pick almost any other subject, climate focused programming doesn't get much, play
Audience.
on
Yeah.
YouTube or anywhere really. And that's a big problem because this is a problem that literally is going to affect every person on Earth
Yes.
and already is to some degree. And it's much worse than people think it is. It's happening much faster.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons that people are not informed is that the media,
Mhm.
the mainstream media, is doing a terrible job of conveying what's happening in climate, and so people aren't so worried because they don't hear much about it. People don't talk much about it, and unless you're sort of focused on the area and you're seeking out programs like ours.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the sad part that, like, it's like hardcore content which does not receive much appreciation or viewership on YouTube or all social media platforms. They always, algorithmically, like, they want to, pump out more content which is
Mm,
like, kind of weird, like kind of different content, but like not hardcore science, climate, and health to educate or raise awareness. But
hmm
absolutely, I think that's one of the things that people have not realized that is happening faster than what we think, right? As
hmm
scientists, like, yes, we have been researching, we knowing more about climate change, but like still, it's kind of like unpredictability, the frequency, the intensity is kind of increasing every day, right?
Well, yes, but there's more than that is happening. For example, I had Jim Hansen or James Hansen, very famous climate scientist who testified to Congress in 1988 warning about we're about to see global warming sort of emerge from the noise of weather, and
Mhm.
it's going to have a big impact and all these things are going to happen, and he was right about all of them.
Yeah.
um, so he was on my program talking about how something called the equilibrium climate sensitivity, and
Mhm.
I'll explain what that
Yes,
is in a
I
moment,
watched that program. Yes.
is 4.5 degrees Celsius instead of what the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change thinks is around 3 degrees.
Mhm.
So, what does that even mean? So, the climate sensitivity is how much the world warms for a given amount of CO2. And when you say ECS, what the measurement is if you double CO2, how much would the world warm? And that's the measure. Double CO2, how much would the world warm? So the IPCC thinks it's 3 degrees of Celsius. And Jim's saying here are three different ways we know
Mhm.
that the number is really 4.5, 50% more warming for a given amount of CO2, right? Which means there's a lot more warming on the way than we think. And you say, well, wait a second. The temperature is what the temperature is today.
Yeah.
And if the warming was more than we think, why would the UN think, how does that all work? It should be higher than we should be measuring it higher today. It says no, because there's one other piece. The aerosols, or sort of the smoke particles from ships and coal plants that we put into the atmosphere, that reflects sunlight, and it also seeds clouds which reflect sunlight, and that cools the earth. And it turns out that the cooling from aerosols is also more than is estimated in the climate models from the United Nations. And so when you put those two things together, the United Nations thinks there's sort of this much of warming and this much of cooling, which you get the measured temperature today.
Mhm.
But Hansen is saying, no, there's this much of warming and this much cooling. And so it's still the same number today. But it also means as we clean up our air pollution, which is something we are in the process of doing around the world. China is putting scrubbers on their coal plant to scrub out sulfur particles. The International Maritime Organization recently passed a rule that ships had to use cleaner fuel so they create less pollution. All of those things are causing the temperature to accelerate in the last few years. And so this is really important stuff. It's hardly covered in the media at all. I think if you walked up to 100 people and asked them, do you know about this thing called equilibrium climate sensitivity? You'd
No
be
idea.
lucky if one said yes.
Yeah. Isn't like the part of the reason that like news media doesn't cover, because when I talked with one of the climate journalists at Oxford University a few weeks ago, And he said that like it's all about attention economy. The media thinks that like if they mention, the president, it's gonna get more views than if they mention, this climate equilibrium sensitivity. They're like, no, it's like, what is it? Like, what do I have to do with it, right? So his argument was that media goes where the attention is. It's not like what we want to see media show us. It's like the other way around. Media sees like something is like kind of, people watching more. They want a more focus, and that is like unfortunately politics. Even if we talk about climate, it's still like climate politics.
Well, I think that might be part of it. The other part is that the major news organizations, at least in the United States,
Mhm.
are owned by corporate entities that have interests that don't align necessarily with yours, and that's one. But actually, it was as Jim Hansen himself was on my program. He was saying that another problem. This will be surprising to I think a lot of your audience, is that there's certain well-known climate scientists that the media turn to,
Mhm.
and when he published his paper called global warming in the pipeline, which explained how this amount of warming we're about to see is more than people think. There were a number of scientists who dismissed his paper, not scientifically. They didn't counter any of the scientific arguments in his
Argument.
paper. In fact, they hadn't even read it yet because it was just published like the day before.
Hmm.
And they said, oh, we think Jim's not in the mainstream. They kind of said these general things. And so the journalists were afraid to publish about it because the people they rely on
Yeah.
kind of said this might not be accurate.
Hmm.
Although it turns out, I'm pretty sure it is accurate because it was, again, he figured it out three different ways. One using ice age data, the
Mhm.
other using satellite measurements, and then the other one using recent temperature measurements and things like that. Three independent lines of evidence, all pointing to the same information. And so we go, wait a second, climate scientists
Yeah.
are stopping journalists from covering climate? And it turns out, yeah, because this also may be a little shocking, but climate scientists, there's like an expression,
Mhm.
climate scientists are conservative in the opposite way that a risk manager is conservative.
Ah.
What does that mean? Like a risk manager from an insurance company, if there's a small chance that your house is going to burn down, they want to know about it and they want to, factor that in.
Yeah.
But if you're a professor or something, you're writing a research paper, and you have to think about it. If you publish a paper that has incorrect information,
Mhm.
that ruins your career.
Yes.
But if
It
you
does.
don't publish a paper that would have correct information, but you didn't publish it,
Yes.
nothing happens. I mean, maybe you didn't advance your career as much as you could have, but it doesn't hurt your career. So they have an incentive to only publish things that they're really sure about. We
Hmm.
usually say 2 sigma or 95% sure of something.
Yes.
So when they're going to publish, let's say, sea level rise,
Mhm.
how much sea level rise should we experience by the end of the century? They're going to tell you it's 2 or 3 feet, which is, by the way, a mind-boggling large amount of sea
Absolutely.
level rise.
Yeah.
But even so, they're 95% sure of that,
Yeah.
right? Wouldn't you like to know what the sea level rise might be with a 50% probability or even
Absolutely.
a 20% probability? Wouldn't you like to know that? Well,
Yeah.
those numbers are like 10 feet, 10 feet of sea level rise. This wipes out most major coastal cities, right?
Yeah.
Island nations.
Mhm.
The bottom third of Florida no longer on the map, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So, yet they don't have an incentive to publish that because they're not 95% sure of that. So the whole incentives, and by the way, Jim Hansen wrote a paper about this a long time ago called Scientific Reticence. It was about why is sea level rise being underplayed. And it's not just sea level rise, temperature rise. The scientists don't like to be the guy who's telling you how bad things are going to be. So they tend to underplay things
Hmm.
when they are personally very, very worried about what's coming down the road.
This is like very interesting and fascinating points you raised. I think so. There is a scientific establishment. Is that what we are getting into? So, like, you do not want to be alienated among in the community. You feel like it's kind of self-censorship or spiral of silence. When you think that many people are not going to agree with you, you like gonna hold that thing with you in your desktop, but it's actually doing the more damage to the world if you keep that instead of like getting some criticism from the community.
I don't know if they're hiding anything. I mean, they
They're not
know,
hiding, but like they're not making it public either,
yeah,
right?
they're not making it public. In their way, they're being conservative, and so what they do tell you is going to happen, and it's really bad, by the way. If
Yeah.
you read the UN reports,
Mhm.
which is sort of UN has a group of thousands of climate scientists that filter all of the research from around the world and consolidate it and summarize it. And if you read that,
Mhm.
and it's pretty bad what they're saying. I mean, it's going to be pretty bad. But that's not probably the reality. The reality is, and everyone tries, when you talk to climate deniers, they try to say, well, there's uncertainty in those numbers. Well, first of all, there's uncertainty in all science, of course, but it also means it could be worse than they're saying. And in this particular case, because of the conservative nature of how it's being presented, it means it probably will be worse than they're saying, and it's going to happen faster. Just one example, we're currently at about 1.5 degrees Celsius global average warming since the Industrial Revolution. And we were supposed to hit that. The Paris Accord was all about how to stay under 2 degrees of warming and really try to stay under 1.5. And that was like 2015, so 10 years ago. And yet we're at that now. Scientists argue, oh, we're not really there yet. But the reality is that we're going to drop below an average of 1.5 degrees of warming at this point in time is almost nothing. So we're there on the average for all intents and purposes. But we're also on track to hit 2 degrees of warming maybe in the 2030s. This is like, instead of like people thinking 2050. And so happening much faster than people are generally aware of. And people think that 2 degrees is some kind of safe limit. If we can stay under 2, we will be safe, whatever that means, right? Well, Jim Hansen and many others think that 2 degrees is catastrophic.
Yeah.
We're seeing the impacts already from 1.5 degrees of warming, and we're not happy with the floods and the intense heat and the droughts and fires and everything are scaling exponentially. At 2 degrees, it's not just a little bit worse; it's a
It is not.
lot
Yeah,
worse.
I think one of the videos from Carl Sagan from the 80s kind of circulated on social media back and forth, where he delivered a speech what 2 degree means on the stage, and in the audience, I'm like, he beautifully articulated what 2 degree can do, like kind of like kind of just raised as a drought from the Midwest, like there will be no crops at all. Degree temperature goes up in the Midwest. So so one of the other things, just on another point, what you just said about um, like climate scientists are more conservative in their estimates and how they tell to the public, like what does it mean, and especially like world organizations are also like IPCC or others, they want to be more conservative on the safe side, probably thinking that that's like one of the other arguments, probably thinking like, oh, if we sound alarm or scare people, like there won't be any earth left on 2050 or something, people might like, oh, you know what, it's gonna end anyway, so what to care about, right? That's like another argument or justification, and they don't want to sound alarm, they don't want to be get disapproved, and then that kind of question their scientific kind of authority to talk about the subject.
Well, I don't know. I think. By the way, I'm very optimistic about what we could do about climate change. I'm not optimistic about what we will do about climate change,
Yes.
but I think there's so much we can do. And if I think the public was aware of the dangers that lie ahead, not just for their grandchildren, but certainly for their children and even themselves, because people are being impacted greatly by climate change all over the world. And someone put it, at first you're watching videos filmed by other people, maybe watching cars floating down the center of the city or something like that, and then you're filming them yourself. So it's becoming closer to home all the time. But so there's so much we could do, and if the public was concerned, then policymakers could actually implement things that would help a lot. I just had Bill McKibben on my program a couple of days ago, and solar energy from solar photovoltaics is growing unbelievably rapidly in China. It's something like 3 gigawatts a day, which is about a nuclear power plant's worth of energy being built every 8 hours, okay, in China. In the United States, of course, we're going backwards. Trump administration is trying to stop renewables because they're supporting the fossil fuel industry, which doesn't like to have free energy available to everyone. They want to charge people for the energy. And so, they're against that. And if the public was concerned, and therefore our elected leaders were concerned, there's so much we could do to rapidly switch away from fossil fuels. There's also things where I think we're going to have to do, which is to step in and start to remove some of the 2.6 trillion tons of CO2 that we have already emitted over since the Industrial Revolution. And because we've let things go so far, and we're going to be at 2 degrees in 10, 15 years, which would be catastrophic on its own, I think we are going to step in and do something that's called solar geoengineering, or sometimes called sunlight reflection methods, or solar radiation management, which is artificially cooling the earth while we reduce our use of fossil fuels and start removing the past emissions. And a lot of people are against that. They think it's a terrible idea. They think it would stop people from reducing emissions for some reason. I think if we were serious about climate change, we do everything. We don't just pick one
Absolutely.
thing.
Whatever the way we find to fight it. Yes, absolutely. Or
And they're also
alternative way.
worried about the side effects of doing that, by the way. And the side effects, while real, I think are nothing compared to the side effects of not doing it. we have a feel for what that might be, and it's not pretty.
So, you just mentioned a little bit about the administration. The U.S. is like a global power. It decides things, right? And I'm still like a big hegemon, like to dictate things how it goes, like globally, and especially in the scientific world. Like in like all the climate, health, science, U.S. lead the world in innovation in a lot of things. What is going on here, like this administration, or like how did we actually get here? That's like my first question to you, like how did we get here, ending up electing those officials who've been denying the climate realities for decades, and we ended up electing them, and now they're like in the Congress, in Senate, and in the White House, and everywhere.
Well, I think it's there's a lot of parts that I'm not the expert on that, but I think in general there's incredible amount of disinformation funded by
Oil and gas companies.
wealthy companies and people. Humans aren't very rational. We like to think of ourselves as rational, but in reality, we're not rational at all. We grew up. We evolved long hundreds of thousands of years ago in the savannah, where our view are two important things about today. What am I going to eat, and what's going to try to eat me? And so you had very short-term focus. Long-term problems were not something that helped you evolve and survive. So we're not good at looking into the future, even when we know about the problem. It's not something that triggers us to action. So there's that aspect of it, that we don't worry about things we should be worried about. And there's an incredible amount of disinformation. The algorithms. You're just talking about, you mentioned earlier about algorithms like on YouTube. There's a guy named Carl Bergstrom, who you should have on your program, did a paper a long time ago, 3-4 years ago, on how the algorithms in social media are as dangerous, as much a threat to civilization as climate change is. Because when you think about it, the way we survived back on the savannah is that we made decisions, and we made just enough more right decisions than wrong decisions to allow us to survive. Now the algorithms are rigged to make money. And it turns out that you'll stay on a site much more if there's controversy and all this other stuff, and not just like real information. So the fake information makes more money. And so now you're making decisions with this algorithm slanting you towards bad decisions, as we can see with this current administration, to answer your question. And so now we're making more wrong decisions than right decisions in a world that's getting very dangerous from climate change and many other issues. And so that is a
All
bad
right.
combination.
So yeah, I mean, like on the other hand, the people who believe in climate change, like say some people in Democratic Party, right? I mean, we do not see them anywhere resisting, protesting, or doing anything to these policy decisions they are making, and they're gonna have like consequences for the decades to come.
Well, yeah, by the way, don't get me wrong. On my program, I talk about this a lot,
Mhm.
that even when under let's say Biden, or let's say Clinton, who had Al Gore as vice
Yes,
president,
yes,
Al Gore, who did an inconvenient truth, Al
yes,
Gore, who knew all about climate change
yes.
before he ever became vice president, and they didn't do anything for climate. And then Obama, who spoke eloquently about climate change, didn't do anything for climate. And Biden, who did pass the IRA, which was mostly about subsidizing renewables as opposed to phasing out fossil fuels, right? There's a thought that, oh, if we grow renewables, we'll use less fossil fuels. Well, it turns out renewables are growing very fast, and yet fossil fuels are not dropping. They're at a record high right now. So a better policy would be to phase out fossil fuels, which they won't even touch. So no party will touch that in the United States.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's we don't have. And again, let's get back to the fact
Mhm.
that the public doesn't talk about climate change. If you ask them, "Are you concerned about climate change?" in a poll or something, they'll say, "Yes, I am
Yes. Yeah.
concerned." And if you ask
Very.
them, "Would you like the government to do something about climate change?" they'll say, "Oh yes, I would like the government to do."
Yes.
But when it comes time to vote, do they vote on climate change?
Yeah.
No, they don't. And
Economic.
so until that happens, both parties are not going to do enough. Yeah. And
So
so I tell
like,
people that the number one thing you can do about climate change, that's the easiest thing to do, is to talk to everybody you know about it.
yes.
And it might be a little hard at first because people don't want to talk about it. But once everyone is talking about it, that's when action will start to happen.
Yeah, so I mean, we're not even talking why do policies fail. We're like talking a step before, like there are no policies that are being put in place, which are like, windmills are not, whales are not happy with the windmills or things like that. I mean, like these crazy conspiracy theories which have no connection, and the public has very low literacy. They have like less interest to talk about, and it's not a part of our day-to-day conversation to talk about climate change. And then it translates into like these policymakers are not talking about climate change in DC or in their like other state capitals. Like they don't need to come up with renewable energy or sustainable development and all those issues. So like you talk about like, yes, the one thing we can do is to talk about climate change like with family and friends and like whoever, co-workers and wherever you are. And the second thing, I also watched your episode on how do climate change policies fail. So you did that episode a while ago, and then I was reading on different countries how Australian climate policies are failing, how different regions are dealing within like United States right now. What do you think is the climate policies are failing? Um,
Well, we don't really have any. I mean, the one that we did have, well, I mean, that's not fair to say we don't have any.
we
And
do.
then there's states like California that have their own. They tend to be focused on, again, subsidizing renewables. But I think the thing that people don't realize is that the amount of renewables doesn't impact climate change. You could have 10 times more solar power tomorrow, and it won't change climate change as long as the amount of fossil fuels is still the same. So
Yeah.
it's fossil fuel emissions, not percentage, but absolute amount. That's what causes climate change. It adds greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And renewables are neutral on the subject. They don't add greenhouse gas and they don't take them away either, by the way. So it's kind of neutral. So while these policies are sort of maybe good for economics and then the people like it, they're not getting at the heart of the matter, which is we need to rapidly phase out fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And we could do that, but it's not like it's even discussed.
Yeah.
It's not like they discussed it and decided not to do it.
Yeah.
It's not even a subject that comes up, at least in the United States. Other places, somewhat, some discussion. And Europe is doing more than we're doing. China, which everyone complains is currently the biggest emitter, even though the United States is a much bigger emitter in totality. And in climate change, CO2 lasts in the atmosphere essentially forever, hundreds of thousands of years. So what matters is your total amount. It doesn't matter how much you did last year. And so the United States is still the biggest polluter. But China is doing the most right now to actually try to get rid of fossil fuels by scaling renewables to the point where they're no longer building coal plants all the time, and they're actually going to, it's expected, I should say, that they'll actually start lowering fossil fuel emissions very soon.
But
Maybe this year.
we don't want to tell that to people because they're our enemies. So we don't want to tell what they are doing, right? So we want
Well,
to.
they're also going to take over. I mean, would you rather run your economy on a free source of energy, or would you rather run your economy on something that only certain countries can produce and you have to buy it every single day? I mean, which one's going to make you more secure?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, like, what do you see? Like, let's say, like, this administration is gonna go, as you just laid out a little bit. Like, none of these governments are like kind of pro-environmental policies, or not. They're not doing drastic changes to phase out from fossil fuels and putting more renewable energy sources in terms of transportation, in terms of industry, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
all those legislations beyond current administration in 2028. Do you think like we still have 3 more years in terms of to see what the climate look like, although we are seeing more floods, more heat waves, and all of that, but like post this administration, what do you see happening in the US in terms of climate change?
Well, again, I think in the Biden administration and Obama administrations, they spoke eloquently about climate and said it's a really important problem. We're going to do something about it. But as I mentioned, they didn't really do anything substantial about it. With Trump, he's telling you, I will not do anything about it. He's promising you that he doesn't believe in it. He won't do anything for it. He's going to do the opposite. He's going to drill, baby, drill. So yet, what's going to happen is the same thing that has been happening is climate impacts are going to keep increasing. We're going to have bigger floods. We're going to have more wildfires, more extreme heat. We're going to have all of these extreme weather. We're going to have all of these things happen more and more. And now you'll be able to say, wow, these things are happening. And this guy is saying he's doing nothing about it. Maybe we better get somebody who will actually do something about it. So there's some chance, just speculation here, that the next person in charge, because of climate impacts being noticed more and more and being worried about more and more, that they'll have more power to do real action than previous administrations have had. Now, this and to get back to sort of answer a question maybe you didn't ask yet, but I think the only thing that's worked so far in terms of getting the public and policymakers to pay any attention to climate beyond just holding meetings or something like that is climate damage being recognized as climate damage. And in the last 5 years, there's been so much. We've seen things we've never seen before. There's a new term called car soup, where you see cars bobbing up and down in a flooded center of a city, floating down the center of the city. This is happening like every week somewhere, every few days now. It's like I didn't see this when I was a kid. Like, I don't know, maybe once in a while there's a huge flood somewhere, and that got a lot of coverage. This is like doesn't even make the news anymore because it's so common. And of course, the fires, while we always had fires, are much bigger than in the past, and consuming. It's not the number of fires has changed much, but the size of the fires have grown exponentially. And so these things are getting recognized. And I think if the public would just start to worry more about it, like they worry about the economy or they worry about, the healthcare or something, if they worry about it, that would get policymakers to care about it too. And so we really have to let the public know what's happening I think it is a lot of people that think, oh, you shouldn't get people scared.
Mhm.
Look, if it's
Yeah,
something that's worth getting scared over, like,
yeah,
did you tell people not to be, when COVID first happened, did you hear people saying, oh, no, no, don't worry about it. Yeah, it
yeah.
might kill you, but
No,
don't
we
worry
did
about it.
not. No.
No, worry about it. Stay
Yeah,
home. Don't go to
yeah,
school, whatever.
absolutely, absolutely.
So when things are serious and can really cause serious damage to people and to societies, it's probably something worth getting a little scared about.
Yeah, so you mentioned, I agree. Like every week, there is something happening catastrophically, like everywhere. Like for example, in Pakistan, uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's my home country. That's like kind of literally devastated with the floods. Like they haven't seen that much flood in history. In history of its existence in the last 78 years, they never saw that much water. So they like literally thousands of people have died, millions of people have been displaced, like billions of worth of dollars, crops have gone, especially rice and other crops, they're gone. They're not gonna come back, right? So it's like kind of every week there is something happening in some parts of the world significantly due to climate change, but we just don't hear about it. Doesn't mean it's not happening, and our news people don't talk about it either much in terms of outside the US what is happening and what we're gonna do about it. So one question I wanted to ask, you have another guest on your show talking about climate action, right? So talking about like there are a lot of movements, sunshine or other movements which are like kind of stopping
Mm-hmm.
a senator or a congressman like disrupting their press
Right.
conferences or their events and things like that to make things visible, like hey, people are dying, people are like having
Mm-hmm.
emergencies, do something about it. But like instead of government doing or listening to them, they just like kind of arrest them or pepper spray,
Sure.
like other things. What do you make of those protests? People are like kind of recording in a different form or shapes we haven't seen that before.
I think you might be talking about my interview with Climate Defiance.
Yes.
Yeah. So studies show that it does work.
Yeah.
Now, is it the thing that changes everything? No, but it does bring attention, number one. And it's like so radical
Mhm.
that the other protesters who are not doing that
Yeah.
all of a sudden seem so much more reasonable,
To do
where
it.
they used to be considered the radical ones, right? The ones who are just protesting in the street but aren't disrupting the meeting. Now, all of a sudden, now they seem like the reasonable ones, and they can be now taken more seriously. They can have more influence. So it's really, think of it as an ecosystem
Mhm.
of of
Yeah.
protest or social change, where you have to have the shock troops
Mhm.
do the crazy stuff. And there's a lot of controversy about whether you should throw a can of tomato soup on the glass covering an important painting. It didn't harm the painting at all, but and they said that's horrible, that's terrible.
Mhm.
Yet that protest got probably 1,000 times more coverage than all those people marching in the streets,
Absolutely.
right? So it does work, it does focus attention, and again, it does sort of legitimize
Mhm.
the other folks who are trying to make change as well. So I think it's all part of something. Look, young people are making up most of these people that are doing this, what's called direct action. Their lives are on the line. This is really serious.
Yeah, they're
And
they're they're, they're
two
careers
degrees
are on the
in
line
10,
too.
15 years is insane. And yet we're not even talking about it.
Yeah. So yeah, we talked about a lot of stuff, but like what are some of the things you think we should be talking more about climate change in the future on media, on social media and everywhere? What are some of the things we need to talk more?
Well, from a climate science point of view, I think we need to talk about how the global warming has recently accelerated because we started cleaning up our pollution. And that also tells us that there's going to be a lot more warming than we thought, sooner than we thought, and that can lead to tipping points such as the shutdown of the Atlantic, what's called the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, or you can think of it as the ocean conveyor belt that brings heat from the tropics to northern Europe. that more and more research in the last 2 years, and I've had a number of people on my show about this, say that this actually can shut down in like 20 years. And when we say shut down, it sort of crosses the point of no return and starts to shut down. You can think of it that way. But when it shuts down, first of all, the crazy thing is Europe goes into a deep freeze, because northern Europe, because that heat's no longer there. But it screws up everything. It also leads to much more sea level rise, much more extreme weather, screws up growing patterns all over the world, lowers rainfall across the entire northern hemisphere, so impacting food production. So this is a horrible thing to happen. And I would bet 90+% of people out there don't even know what it is. The other tipping points are collapse of the West Antarctic ice sheet, which again could lead to very high sea level rise, not in thousands of years, but in 50 years, in 100 years. And just 2 degrees alone, without the tipping points, means so much more flooding, so many bigger fires, that it's going to impact like everyone's insurance, for example, but their day-to-day lives across the world. So these are really, really serious things. And I find it kind of almost fascinating in a way, but kind of crazy that there is so little discussion about it. And that's just the problem. And then there's the solutions, which again, I'm very optimistic about our set of solutions, but I'm not optimistic that we're going to implement them in time.
We could, but we will not.
We're choosing to fail, as one of my guests, Kevin
Yeah,
Anderson, said.
that's a good way to put it. So that was our conversation with Dan Miller today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Appreciate that. So thank you, Dan, for highlighting some of the very pressing and important challenges we are facing, as being also staying optimistic, which is hard sometimes, but absolutely it's important to be optimistic. And we do have a solutions through technology. We do have a solution through research, and it's just a matter of the implementation and the seriousness, and how we want to live. We are choosing not to live in terms of policy, especially related to climate change, but the future generations do want to live in a more cleaner and healthier environment.